Good morning, everyone. Are you still freezing up? No. Not anymore. Okay, allow me to take this opportunity and say thank you to the program director, as well as the host, Ms Lelo. Thank you for having us. I think they tried to introduce me. I should try to pronounce my name, and it was a bit tricky. So my name is Risimati Mathye. I'm Tsonga by birth, from Far North. Just to give a preview of myself, I'm a civil engineer by profession. I work for the Department of Water and Sanitation as the Deputy Director General in the Republic. Don't worry about my age. Somebody says I look older than I look, and somebody says I look younger than I look, so now I'm confused. I can only be in the in-between. But my task that I was given was to try and give the keynote address. And I think it's quite tricky when you have to come and give a keynote address when you are not that much exposed. But however, as an engineer, I think we are involved in so many facets of the infrastructure. Perhaps let me begin by saying that in the space we are living in, I think specifically around the theme, the workshop of wealth. And I try to look at what represents wealth. And I think wealth can't be valued because it's ideas, it's innovations, it's concept. There is a belief, I think, centrally that each one of us carries specific gifts and talents. One, Dr. Miles Monroe, who passed on some years back, he kept saying that one of the richest places in the world is the cemetery. He says in the graveyard there are ideas that died with people untapped. He says there's so much wealth that was never unlocked in people. And then I grew up to also believe that I think one of the deficits of life is that there are so many ideas and concepts that died prematurely in our mind because of fear to implement. And I'm starting in this way to say to Ms Lelo and the team, you should never ever despise the small beginnings. I think we underestimated the first step we take, but if you go back in history, you'll realize that the first step you took as a child was the most important one. Otherwise, if your parents never held you up when you fell and stood up, there's a chance you would have never walked in your life. So those small beginnings are quite crucial. But where are we as the country? Because that's basically what I want to talk about. And I'll touch a bit on water. If you look at how government is set up, specifically when you hear people talk about the Constitution, the central theme of our Bill of Rights in the Constitution, if you look at section 25, 26, and 27, it's centered around giving access to services. It says each one of the citizens of the country has a role and they have a right to gain access to housing, to water, to sanitation, and all those services. The fact that that has been put as a right, there are so many people out there who don't have access to these services. And if you look closer, you realize the country talks about the NDP, National Development Plan for 2030, of which, if you look at the central theme of our country, there are still gaps in society. But as time went by, governments started reconfiguring themselves. Yes, we can talk about the politics of the day, but then you will realize that there's a lot of work that government is doing specifically to ensure that work is not done without the private sector. One of the engines of our society that can unlock the socio-economic centrics of our country is to work with the private sector. There have been quite a lot of bottlenecks in the sector where government made it much more difficult. If you go to the international platforms, I always go around, and when you talk about South Africa, they will tell you, you guys are overregulated. If there's one thing you're good at is to package papers and regulations and statutes, but the implementation has always been a challenge. And now government has realized that there's a need, therefore, to ensure that the private sector plays a role as part of what government is trying to do. And I want to say that these are some of the initiatives, Ms. Lelo, that helps the government to achieve its objectives. Access to information, access to land, access to property, networking and unlocking those avenues that can help each one of us help government achieve its goals. That is the central theme of what we want to talk about. But while government has opened doors to get the private sector in to play, there's therefore a need for initiatives such as this, where people are not going to wait for government. I think in the past, the sociocentric pattern of our country has been in a way that people always want government to do everything. Promise free housing, free water, free electricity, free everything. It therefore meant that the public, every time there's a crisis, government is failing to deliver. But if you look closer, you'll realize that the government is of the people and the people are of the government, which means the wealth of a country is not resting with government, it's resting in our minds, it's resting in our ideas, it's resting in our networking. And that is why wealth, in my view, is not necessarily something that you can touch or describe. It's far beyond, because you won't be able to get to the abyss of what wealth is about. And that is where our ideas are very crucial. It will be unfair for me to finish this keynote address without talking about water. And why water? In the past, every one of us, when we think of water, we've always looked at water as a social good. We didn't think that water has value. But as time went by, people are starting to realize that water is not just a social good. It is an economic good. There is a value to it. And those who are scientific and academic, if you go to look at the 17 SDGs, of which this platform and infrastructure is within SDG 13 and 9, you realize that SDG 6, which talks of water, is an enabler for all the SDGs. In our department, our mantra says, water is life and sanitation is dignity, which means it's a central theme of what life is all about. And just to step out of it is that water plays a very vital role in every infrastructure. You can have dreams, colleagues, to build roads and houses. You can have plans, but without water, they will die in paper and not be realized. And therefore, there's a need for you, all of you, to understand that in your quest to bring property into fruition, you must never stop talking about water. It is the key enabler. Those who are academic and scientific, you know that planet Earth has about 70% of the water. But what is funny is that 97% of that water is seawater. And of that 97%, you only have 3% of water. But out of that 3%, 2% of the water is in your glaciers, underground water. You only have 1% of water to utilize, which is part of the clean water in planet Earth. And therefore, water is a finite resource. We don't have additional water on Earth. And therefore, there's a need that as you innovate, as you come with new ideas to build property, part of what we're advocating as government and as a department is that there should be new norms and views and ideas of how do we conserve water. How do you reuse the grey water that you have in your household, even in your new development? How do you innovate yourself and make sure that you bring or build a green economy? Because water as an enabler and as crucial, it means it's a resource that we need to look after. There's a huge contamination in the country, people don't take water quite serious, but then you realize that there's no other option for life except water. You can have options. If the roads have got potholes, you can drive around. If there's no electricity, you can go chop wood and have gas and whatever. But when there's no water, I don't care how great and how big your idea is, that idea will not come to fruition, because water is an enabler for every economic opportunity that we'll ever have as a country. And that's why we are here to shout our support to this concept, because we are of the view that it is these young people, it's these new ideas that can help government to go out there and say, while we have access to information, while we have access to knowledge, while we innovate ourselves in the property industry, how do we then ensure that the language of water is not left behind? I don't think any of you will be here if you never watched This Morning. I don't think so. So always remember, of everything that I've said, in the world, in planet Earth, we only have 1% of clean water that we can ever utilize as human beings. And the bulk of that same water is contaminated. We don't look after the water. This country, in essence, is a semi-arid country. You know, we enjoy some of the longest summer seasons. We have short rainfalls on average compared to the global economies of scales, and we lose more water. In essence, scientifically, we have proven that each person in South Africa uses 217 liters per person per day. So as you're seated there, by the end of the day, including your washing, your flushing, everything, you would have used over 200 liters of water. And then I ask you a question. The global number says we should be using 173 liters per person per day. The World Health Organization says you can be able to use less than 100 liters per person per day. But as a water-scarce country, with all the ideas that we have to develop the economy through property, when we don't look after the water, which is an enabler, all these developments will die in our dreams. And as government, we are saying as a department, you need to take into account the impact of water in everything that you do. I heard one brother says, no, your roads might not collide with Pumla. You realize that you need Pumla far more than any other person in the room. Because as we set up regulations as government, the people who can help government to achieve those goals, it's you, colleagues. And we are here just to support and to send a message, program director, that says as government, we are opening a space for innovation. We allow people to come with innovative ideas. As the department, we are looking after the national water resources. And we've got powers within our Water Services Act to ensure that each person, each local government, where all of you are operating, you're operating in municipal areas, you're selling properties in municipal areas. And imagine if you're going to sell a property and that property doesn't have water, or they constantly have water cutoffs. So it means you will never be able to sell your properties. So there's therefore a need for each one of us to start thinking. And we appreciate Ms. Lelo for inviting us, because there should be no thinking around development, around economies of scales, without using water as the central enabler for everything that we do. And that's basically the message we are coming to put through, to say, let's conserve our water. At home, when you see somebody wasting water, tell them there's only 1% of water in this world. And we must be able to keep enough water for ourselves and for the next generation. And I always say, when we have passed, my good sir, what will the next generation say? So there was a generation that left behind the depleted economies of scales in water, and now there's blockages in development. Finally, when you come to do property development, it doesn't matter where. There's what we call the bulk contributions. I'm trying to share with you some of the information that can help you. You realize that one of the bottlenecks in municipalities, program director, is that when you want to come with new development, much as it can be part of the special development framework, economic zones, it doesn't matter. But I will always say, let's go and find out if we've got enough bulk services. One of the key issues they look at is, do we have enough water? So what stops this country from having this development in a rapid scale is because some of these bottlenecks are caused because of water. And they will say, no, we don't have enough water in that area. We don't have enough reservoirs. We can't bring much more water because our system is overloaded. Water. So you have development that have been there. There's various amendment schemes. When I was still a young chap, I used to work at the city as one of the development planners, as one of the engineers. And we used to sit and look at some of this development. Before City of Joburg, immediately when City of Joburg was combined by, they used to have the old MLC. Randburg used to operate on its own. Sanitation used to operate on its own. Midrand on its own. Those who are older will know this. But then you realize that when those economic zones were coming up, one of the key bottlenecks was water. That we don't have enough water. But as government, we have gone to unlock some of the old infrastructure projects to bring much more water. In 2032, we'll be able to bring more additional water from the Lesotho Highland Water Project, phase 2 of that project, which the president went to launch, is coming underway. So we'll be able to bring much more water in the parts of Gauteng, in Northwest, part of Mpumalanga, as well as Eastern Cape and Free State. What this means is that while there are these key economic zones in the space, government is making sure that the key enabler in which is water, we are trying to bring that along. Just to give you comfort, because the question could be, you told us about that we've got 1%. What is it that government is doing, specifically in this area, to bring more additional water? Those are the plans that we have in place throughout the country. There are various programs that the government is running, but we are pleading with you as developers in this workshop of wealth as we exchange ideas. Go out there and tell them, government is part of us, but at the same time they are saying to us, we need to be able to conserve water. If I talk beyond this, the program director, I will start telling lies and stories. Thank you so very much for having us. God bless you.